is Marcus. Hello, Marcus. Now, Marcus lives in London. He's a designer. He's a very talented designer. And he creates the designs of a magazine called Pole Oxygen. He then sends those designs over to the printer, and the printer's in China. And then in China, they print the magazine, and then they send it to where it gets distributed. And the magazine itself is actually an Australian magazine.
So, a lot of new independent magazines are local magazines. How is their relation to the territory? Are they more close to the life of a city than mainstream medias?
I think they can be. When people create their own magazines, they do it for different reasons. They sometimes want to create a magazine that feels international, that feels like it's from nowhere. Or they might want to do it to put a voice to something local which isn't found anywhere else in the mainstream media. I think that magazines are always just about telling stories, and it's up to the people who are telling those stories to decide the best ways to do that. Now, what that does mean with this big publishing revolution that we're getting now, that people do have the opportunity to tell local stories, to tell personal stories. There's a magazine, for example, called Karen in the UK, which is just about Karen and her life in South London. It just talks to her friends, it talks to the person who runs the butcher's shop, it picks up things she finds in cafes, and it's actually brilliant because it's very entertaining, it's just the right length, and it's very well designed. So a magazine can tell anything you want to tell, but those that really know about their audience and really feel like they're connected to the city, yes, they can be really a part of the city in a way that sometimes the mainstream media misses.
Ho iniziato dalla seconda. Mi sono persa, non sono arrivata.
Well, actually, some independent magazines are getting distributed in big shops and kiosks, but in the main that doesn't happen, you're right. I think that the location is always just a part of the experience. I think now people are getting more used to encountering a magazine in a place they wouldn't expect, and maybe are more used, at least in some societies, to picking up this magazine and knowing it's free. That was a big shift that's only really happened in the last 5 years. Before that, people thought they were a sort of sample magazine left behind, and maybe they were stealing it by taking it, not really believing it was free. Now, it really does depend, I think, on anything that you get, anything you consume, whether it's food, whether it's music, whether it's magazines. It really does depend on the context you pick it up in terms of the way you're thinking when you start to read it. So if you're sitting in a bar and you open a magazine because your friend's in the toilet, then you're going to flick through it very quickly, and the experience is about something that has to hit you very quickly to persuade you to take it home. If, however, you're sitting in a hairdresser's, perhaps, and you have to wait 20 minutes for your haircut, then you have more time to look at it and to engage with it. So any experience is always dependent on what the context is that you get it in. And what's interesting is that magazines are being placed into areas where you wouldn't normally expect to find them. And so these have to react and be designed thinking about the way that the reader will pick them up. Well, usually magazines, of course, they do depend on sponsorship and advertising. That's a common thing even for those magazines that aren't free. When you buy a magazine in the kiosk, actually the €3 cover price doesn't cover the cost of printing the magazine. It's the advertisements that support it. So yeah, they are always dependent on sponsors. Now, whether that means that the content isn't truly independent, whether that means that the content is compromised by the advertisements that are inside it, that depends on each magazine. Some make a very good job of staying independent, and other ones start to blur the boundaries in order to make enough money to survive. But that's down to the individual magazines. I don't think that just because a magazine has advertising, it means that it can't be independent, it can't have something strong to say.